Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Conversation Starters. My name is Molly Dubin and I'm curator with the Jewish Museum Milwaukee. And this week our entire theme is looking at Jews who rock, which we're very excited about. As some of you may recall, we did a terrific exhibit back in 2014, hard to believe it's that many years ago, looking at the many ways that Jewish individuals, groups, show organizers, studio heads have been involved with the development of rock and roll and popular music. So today it's incredibly fitting that we have with us local musician, a Jew who rocks, Steve Cohen. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Molly.
How are you?
I feel great. Feel
Well, you
good.
look great. You look great. And got a great rock and roll setting behind you there. Got some amps, got some musical posters, very fitting. So we'll get our conversation going because we have a lot we want to talk about. So first of all, we know you're a musician. We also know from some connections to a recent project on Abe Cohen, the potter, that you have some artistic background and talents as well, but you decided to go down the path of music. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started?
Well, sure. It seems like a lot of things started in high school so long ago. I was in high school from 69 to 72. And it was in the early days of high school that I started hearing blues music for the first time, in the beginning of high school. So that was a start for me. My best friend, probably in the 8th grade and freshman year, was Bill Stone, and his parents owned a bunch of blues records, mostly country blues, guys like Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, Lightning Hopkins and Leadbelly, people like that. So that kind of, at the age of whatever, 14, 15, kind of piqued my interest in that kind of music. As we got further, a little older and further into high school, we were interested in some of the English rock bands that were taking blues music and bouncing it back to America with their own twist on it. So bands like Cream, who were doing Robert Johnson songs and Muddy Waters songs, and the Rolling Stones, who were big on Chuck Berry and Jimmy Reed.
Sure.
Even the Beatles, started off really as a band that just wanted to play American blues and R&B. So listening to these guys who were the popular bands of the day, you see on the credits of their albums, oh, this Cream song, 4 Until Late, that's Robert Johnson. Who's Robert Johnson? Go to the library. We didn't have the internet then.
Sure.
So we started, kind of backtracking and figuring out who the original blues artists were. So that was really the impetus for our initial interest in blues music.
So you got started fairly early on. The interest was there, and also the interest in blues was there very early on. So you've started to touch on that. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about what exactly it is about that particular genre that really spoke to you or that resonated with you. There's so many ways you could have gone, but blues is your focus. So what is it about that just drew you in?
That's a darn good question and maybe a hard one to answer, but I'm going to give it a try.
Okay.
Real authentic blues, when you hear it, as a musician now, I can say that, it's not about technique or chops, as we like to call it. But before I was a musician and I knew that it wasn't about technique, the way that these original authentic blues artists delivered the music garnered an emotional response from me.
Mm-hmm.
There's something kind of intangible about the honesty and the directness of these original blues artists that just kind of hit me. Again, I don't exactly know how to describe it. One way, now that I, have a little bit more education about blues, you can take a blues lyric and that same blues lyric might be delivered by 10 or 12 different artists. And each version of that same blues lyric will cause a different emotional response. It's interpretive. Just something about the honesty and the emotional connection to the delivery of this blues music, I found really appealing and different than the popular music, that my friends were listening to when I was a teenager.
Sure. I think you touched on, something that is really, unique to blues, but also folk music, the idea of, the storytelling, the narrative that, blues music, there seems to be genuine story there, and rooted, as you said, in whatever musician happens to be, playing a song maybe that had been written or developed by someone else. They all bring their own kind of unique spin to it. And I think that comes from infusing it with their own experiences. And I think blues kind of allows for that. Is that something you would agree?
I would agree, and I would add the word personality. You know, the individual personality of the artist is going to affect the way that they approach delivering these lyrics and this music. The lyrical content of blues, maybe, I hate to make, overall general statements, but I think the lyrical content of a lot of blues music is really about real life stuff.
Yes.
Prior to the popularity of blues, which started in the white communities, in the 60s, the rock music that people were listening to was really about boy meets girl, kind of sugar-coated love themes, or cars. So something about the lyrical content of blues seemed a little different than what was being the pablum that was being presented to the masses because it was selling. Industry
Right.
was changing.
Right. And it also, it has some very, deep history there when you talk about looking back to, Tin Pan Alley, and certainly that gets into, you know, jazz and other, some other genres. But we know, Tin Pan Alley really was this place where different musical genres, different cultures mixed together. And I think, that's part of what adds to the richness of blues. And there really, there's a lot of history behind it.
It's very true. And, in more broad terms, I think that's really the story of American music. There is just one hybrid leads to another. And blues music, too, is a hybrid of, a number of different genres, that came together to form this whole new thing. Interesting, too, that blues music was created by and for African Americans out of sources that were not necessarily African American originated sources.
Exactly, exactly. And it just also, again, speaks to the diversity of, like you said, that idea of hybrid and mixing of ideas and cultures, and being able to, have a shared experience, but also make it your own in a unique sense. Um, so with that, you kind of touched on, when we started off, a few of the groups when you were in high school that you were listening to, Cream and others of that ilk. Um, can you talk to us? You've had a long musical career. You've played with a lot of different musicians and in many, many different venues. Can you share a few of your most impactful memories, or some of your favorite experiences that you've had along your musical path?
Well, like you say, it sounded like you were phrasing it as though this were in the past,
No, no,
but
no. Ongoing career. Absolutely.
I'm hoping to keep playing music because, man, once it's in your
Definitely.
blood, it's there forever. You know, there have been a lot. I could look at it chronologically. I know that the I'd mentioned Bill Stone's parents having blues records. So Bill's mom, Shirley, what a great mom she was. Um, she would take us at the age of 14, 15 to a couple different venues where we were, exposed to live blues music. I don't think any of my other friends had that incredible opportunity to see this music firsthand. So 54, 65, 66, 67, something like that, maybe a little later. Shirley would take Bill and I, and sometimes our other friend Dave Kasich, to a coffee house on the east side of Milwaukee called the Avant-Garde.
Hmm.
So the Avant-Garde was coffee house, right? They didn't serve alcohol. And it was really more of a hippie poetry, music, art venue. So we really only went there when there was music, and we were too young to be a part of what was changing from a beatnik scene to a hippie scene. So Shirley would take us there to hear guys like Magic Sam, Johnny Shines, Big Walter. Um, these were the days when what they call the blues revival was kind of starting to happen. So a
Hmm.
lot of the original acoustic blues guitar player singers were having a resurgence in their career. They're being rediscovered and having some success, more success than they'd ever had when they were recording 78 records in the 1920s and 30s. So all these guys came through the avant-garde. We didn't see them all. They all came, Sonny and Brownie and Skip James. I mean, just um, there was a white acoustic blues group called Kerner, Ray, and Glover that came through a number of times. But we heard a few of these bands, so that was a real eye opener. The other band that Shirley took us to see there a few times was a local blues group called the New Blues. So they were, this was the day. Not only was there this blues revival going with folk blues artists, but there were also, this was the beginning of white blues bands like Paul Butterfield, John Mayall. Bands like that were starting to have some success, interpreting blues music. So Milwaukee was no exception. It had a few of those kind of groups, and that's what the New Blues was. They were an electric blues band kind of channeling uh, black electric blues. The members of the group were, when we heard them, the lineups changed a few times, but the members of the group were Sam McHugh, Denny Geyer, Jim Lieben, Terry Anderson was the drummer, and Jim Marcotte was the bass player.
Some familiar names
So,
there. Some familiar names there.
yeah, they ended up moving out to the West Coast, and Jim Marcotte ended up being um, Al Stewart's manager, and they all had various careers. Sam McHugh went on to tour with the Everly Brothers for 15 years. I mean, they all went on, but this short-lived New Blues band was influential to us. So when we started playing, the guy that ran the Avant-Garde had a reel-to-reel tape player, and he would record a lot of the performances there. In fact, one of those performances by Magic Sam has now been released on Delmark Records. I think Bill and I were there that night. But anyway, somehow we got a hold of one of the reel-to-reel tapes of the New Blues playing at the Avant-Garde, and Bill's folks had a reel-to-reel player. So when we formed our first white boy high school blues band, we used that reel-to-reel tape, and we tried to emulate the New Blues. We recreated their arrangements. I mean, that was one of the ways that we learned how to play blues, was having access to this, being able to go back and listen to the New Blues play a set. It was cool.
That sounds amazing, and to, as you say, to have a friend's mom to kind of take you to some of those venues, to be able to experience some of that at such a young age, and to be able to appreciate it, because that's not something that 14, 15-year-old boys necessarily would have been drawn to, but it was something that spoke to you from an early age. And it also influenced the type of instruments that you play. So what do you primarily play?
I play the harmonica. That's my primary instrument. And again, hearing the New Blues, Jim Lieben was definitely the first live harmonica player I heard, and it was very influential to me. The caveat to the New Blues, I guess, is that later in life, after I started being, a more prolific performer and booking agent, I was able to tag Jim Lieben and Sam McHugh and Denny Geyer onto performances. So these guys who really helped form who I became, I got to interact with them musically, and just very gratifying.
That had to have been an amazing experience, as you say, to be able to actually play with some of these individuals that you looked up to and who influenced and shaped your career. That's amazing. So on that note, that sounded kind of punny.
No pun intended, I know.
So one of the reasons we really wanted to do the Jews Who Rock theme this week is we are unfortunately without the wonderful event that we also look forward to every year, which is Summerfest, which of course since 1968 was the first year that it occurred. Actually 35 venues across the city, and then it was figured out about a year or so later that a centralized location was the key to sustaining a long and successful event. And since 1999, it's been touted as the world's largest music festival. And one of the most amazing things about Summerfest, I think, is not only the amazing bands that are brought in that are, of course, top acts, but also it really shines a light on some of our local artists and some of our, amazingly talented local musicians, and what they contribute to the Milwaukee music landscape. So have you played at Summerfest in years past?
Well, let me think about that for a minute. Yes, over and over and over again. So many times. And in a certain sense, there might be, if we were to follow the trajectory of Summerfest, I think there would be a parallel to the trajectory of my musical career.
Interesting.
We did start playing there probably in '72 with our high school band. And then as the years went by, I played there with the more current version of our high school band, which was called Leroy Airmaster. But, as you mentioned early in this interview, I've played with quite a few different ensembles, and I've probably played at Summerfest with 20 different groups.
Wow.
I played there every year. Some years I played there once, some years I played there 10 times. Everything, it's just a continual organic evolution. At a certain point, I became a booking agent. And again, Summerfest has been a wonderful account for me in that, aside from the performance aspect of it, which is fantastic. I've played on all the stages and they're all great. But in the world of booking agents, particularly in a commercial market like Milwaukee, there are not very many agents willing to book non-commercial music. So with my love of blues and jazz and acoustic music, I was able to develop a relationship as an agent with Summerfest and get bookings for non-commercial music, which, they wanted.
Absolutely.
They had an actual blues stage for a number of years. And
Right.
I got to book some great acts for them over the years. I think one of the very first acts I booked there was Otis Rush. I'd always wanted, he never played in Milwaukee, and he was just a god in the blues world, Chicago blues world. So I got to book Otis Rush. It was great.
That's amazing. So you've really seen the music business, the industry, from a couple of different sides, a couple of different perspectives. So I'm sure that's been part of the evolution as well. Are you still continuing to function as a booking agent? And I also know that you teach. Is that something that you continue to do as well?
Molly, I do it all. Whatever it takes. I think I realized fairly early in my career that much as I love playing music, it was going to be very difficult to play non-commercial music full-time and make a reasonable living at it.
Right.
So I developed different skill sets that enabled me to do alternative music related activities that could bring some money in. And so, I was able to, I feel like I was able to do the good work of giving worthy non-commercial musicians, some venues that none of the other agents really were interested in taking on because there wasn't as much money in it. That's
Sure.
long and the short of it.
Sure.
So the band I was in, Leroy Airmaster, was really pretty popular in the 80s. So in the early 80s, I would start getting calls for Leroy from 3 or 4 different places for the same night. So, it was a light bulb moment. And I realized, okay, I can, I know all the other blues bands in town. I can start booking them, to fill up the need in the marketplace. And it was a win-win for everybody. I made some commissions. The bands got gigs. The venues got good music. Boom.
Fantastic. It's amazing. And you're being kind of a Renaissance man, kind of segues nicely into the next piece. We're going to share a video of you, which is combining your early love of art, which you've recently gotten back into, which you've been combining with music. And that's some of what you've been doing during the quarantine. So I want to kind of ask you a couple questions here. You recently got back into pottery, which was an early love of yours. And one of the reasons that we connected early on when the pandemic started, we were looking at online content development, and we were talking about music, but then also started talking about art, and you started sharing with me some amazing stories about Abe Cohen, prolific ceramic artist, potter, and some of the collection that you had. And of course, you were the idea person behind the wonderful online exhibit we have right now, Abe Cohen, Fired Up, the pottery of Abe Cohen. So we'll share a little bit of a video of you combining those skills.
Every day I have the blues. Every day I have the blues. When you see me worried, woman, it's you I had to lose. Look at him. Nobody loved me. Seemed like nobody seemed to care. When you see me wearing walnuts, you I hate to lose. I'm gonna pack my suitcase.
Can you talk to us a little bit about why you got back into, just a little bit about how you got back into that and that kind of unique combination of uniting those two activities, particularly during this time that we've been in isolation?
Well, sure. Just regarding the exhibit that you and I worked on together to bring the history and the pottery of Abe Cohen back into the forefront of people's consciousness, much like I was able to perform with Jim Lieben and Sam McHugh, Denny Geyer. So here you brought to me an opportunity to give homage to a person who was a mentor to me in that field of art pottery. I was an apprentice with Abe Cohen for about 1.5 years, and I learned so much. I had a very minimal background in pottery up to that point, based on a very short 1 year in high school, and then working on my own without any direction for another 1 or 2 years. But I had an opportunity to apprentice with Abe, so I did. I learned a ton. It was certainly about making art and making pottery, but it was also, Abe was a great guy to observe, just as a phenomenal human being. So still, when I worked with him, I was in my early 20s, and that's a pretty impressionable period. So I was fortunate to be in Abe's sphere for that 1.5 years. After my apprenticeship, I didn't feel like I could do both. So I opted for the music career, which I did for the next 40 years, something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood. And really didn't touch clay in all that time. So fast forward to when I'm 60 years old. I'm about to turn 66. So when I was 60, I found out that you can take free classes at UWM as their over 60 program. So I did. I took classes for a few years. I took poetry workshops, which was always an interest of mine. I took yoga classes and meditation classes, and 1 year, 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, I was looking for another class to take, and there's an off-campus pottery class that you can take. There was it wasn't free, but it was not expensive at all. So I looked into it and signed up, and I went down there, and it was being held at a studio, cooperative studio called the Murray Hill Pottery Works, which is on the east side of Milwaukee, very near the Jazz Estate or Hooligans, Beans and Barley, in that neighborhood. So one thing led to another. Even having not worked in clay for 4 decades, I took this beginner class, and I knew immediately that I needed to take a more advanced class. So I got out of that class and took the more advanced class, and the teacher said to me right away, there's nothing I can teach you. So one thing led to another, and I ended up developing a relationship with the studio in which I actually taught beginner classes and started developing my pottery skills once again.
And as we will have seen in the video, you've been combining some of that throwing of pots with playing the harmonica simultaneously. You've sent me some great clips, which have just brightened my days to no end during the time of isolation. So it's amazing the way that you have stayed creative. And I think that's one of the things about creative individuals that has been a benefit, if you will. During a time of isolation, having a creative mind and being able to, whether it's throw a pot or pick up an instrument or put on your harmonica, I think it allows you to kind of stay vital in terms of your creative process. It keeps the mind sharp, keeps those ideas going.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. For quite a while now, as a person who needs a creative outlet, performing for audiences, live audiences, has provided that for me. So clearly we're not playing for live audiences anymore. And like you say, this pandemic and isolation has created opportunities to find new ways for me to express myself. In life, when you get an idea, if you kind of have to grab it and take that first step, even though it can be a little bit scary. So I have found that by taking that first step, one thing invariably leads to another. And before you know it, you've got a whole new direction. So that's really what happened for me.
That's
briefly,
amazing.
Briefly, what happened with this throwing pots while playing the harmonica, the clay studio that I'm working at changed hands, and the new owner, who's kind of a with it modern hip guy, he and I chuckled about the idea of throwing a pot while playing harmonica on the rack. We just, it was just kind of a joke between us for a month or two. And then one day I had my harmonica rack and my harps with me, and I had been performing with tracks on occasion where a whole band is recorded without vocals or without solos. So I said, Brian, what do you think? You got time? Should we just do this? He said, sure. So he had already been taking videos of himself and posting them on Facebook, videos of himself doing quirky pottery things, throwing like a salsa bowl out of cream cheese and then filling it with salsa and sitting back and dipping his taco chips in, so that kind of stuff. It made sense. And so very spontaneously, we just did one day, and he posted it on Instagram. I posted it on Facebook, and in like a week, we had 17,000 views. So kind of figured we were onto something. So there was the first step.
Yeah.
This caused me to install a movie making app on my phone, and as they say, the rest is history.
Well, That is, and it's it's amazing that you've kind of gotten into that, and the joy that it's brought to so many people. So with that, kind of wrapping up here, so we could talk for forever about all the projects that you're involved in. Is there anything special on the horizon for you, or that that you have in the hopper?
I think in normal times, I would probably be hatching up all kinds of schemes, recording schemes, and I do have a couple things in mind for once things open up again. But until such a time as I can, interact with other musicians live and with audiences live, I'm just going to pursue the path that I'm on. I'm really enjoying figuring out how to make videos, and I'm trying to make each one of them a little bit different. I'm trying to continue to improve my skills as a potter. I have a brand new granddaughter, so I'm looking forward to being an active grandpa, something I've never done
Yes,
before. That's a big project.
definitely.
Musically, there's a fellow that I was enjoying working with. His name is Jim Olschmidt. He's just a wonderful guitarist, singer, songwriter, lives in Sheboygan, and he and I have excellent rapport. So he and I have some tentative plans to do some recording, shoot some videos, maybe hit the road when there is a road again. So that would be, my duo project with Jim Olschmidt probably satisfies the definition of what you're asking here.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, Steve, that's something we'll have to look forward to. We'll all, be keeping an eye on you, keeping an ear open. And we can't thank you enough for spending some time talking with us about your career and your musical journey, which you are bringing to people in all kinds of exciting new formats. So thank you for being with us during this Jews Who Rock Week theme, and sharing a little bit about your journey. So thanks to everyone who is tuning in to visit with us. And Steve, any parting words?
Boy, I'm just enjoying life. Enjoy life regardless of the circumstances. Don't let things get you down. Everything's going to be all right.
Very good advice, and a very good note to end on. So thank you again, Steve, for being with us. Thanks to everyone who tuned in for this conversation starter. Be sure to keep tuning in for more online content and visiting our website, jewishmuseummilwaukee.org, to see what exciting things we have on the horizon. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the week.